Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Lucy Coote, and I'm the Community Ambassador for Rosedale Funeral Home. As a company, we're committed to be fully integrated within the communities we serve and work closely with many interfaith ministers. COVID-19 has had a huge and profound impact on our country. Today, we're going to look at its impact on our faith communities, how funerals have had to change, and how resilient and resourceful our faith communities have been. And now I'd just like everybody to introduce themselves, telling us which faith you are here to represent today. We start with Rose. Thank you, Rose.
Oh, hello, I'm Rose, and I'm a member of the Baha'i community.
Hello, I'm Stephen, and I'm from the Anglican Church, the Christian community.
Another Steve. I'm from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also of the Christian community.
Hi, I'm Sunita Nagpal. I'm from Hindu faith, and I'm from the East Anglia region, representing Great Yarmouth, Golston, Norwich, Kings Lynn area.
Hi, I'm Kyla. I'm a priest in the Church of England, representing the Christian community.
Hi, I'm Anna. I am a rabbi for Liberal Judaism, the Jewish community.
I'm Shan, and I'm from the Muslim community here in Norwich. I was rep on Sacre for a while, quite a long while, Senior Advisory Council for Religious Education. I got very involved in interfaith work. It's really nice to be here.
Hi, I'm Jenny, and I'm a member of the Religious Society of Friends, perhaps better known as Quakers, and I'm a member of the Beccles Quaker meeting.
Thank you all, and it's so lovely to see you all. We're going to have 3 questions today. The first question we're going to start with is, in what way has COVID-19 affected worshipping in your communities? And Rose, if we could again start with you. Thank you.
Well, a meeting for worship in the Baha'i faith has to include refreshments. So that rules out the full, proper meeting for worship, which has to have a devotional aspect, consultative aspect, and refreshments, even though it be only a glass of water. Obviously, we haven't been able to meet. We normally meet in people's homes because we're a small and scattered group. So that really hasn't been very feasible. So I think we've done what most faiths have done. We've used Zoom where it's suitable. Certainly for study circles, which are quite a feature of the Baha'i faith, we have a series of study circles equivalent to Bible study classes, really. And we can do those on Zoom quite satisfactorily. We have a very useful WhatsApp group for the Suffolk Baha'is, which is a lovely way of keeping in touch. And in fact, we probably keep in touch better now than we did before, because to drive down to Ipswich to meet friends was perhaps something you didn't want to do, whereas to just meet them on WhatsApp is lovely. So in some ways we're better connected than we were before. We do online devotionals, which are meetings that we share readings from all faiths, because the Baha'i core message is unity. So interfaith is something that we all do. So we've had the occasional small gathering in person where perhaps 3 or 4 people who lived close could get together to celebrate a holy day. But of course, those are going to be out of the window again now. So we've done, I guess, the best of a bad job, but actually have ended up probably being more in touch with each other than we usually are.
That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you, Rose. Stephen.
The most important impact on the worshipping of the community is that we enjoy singing a lot, and to be without singing has a huge impact on the feel of a service, and to be wearing masks and not to be able to greet each other sort of openly and to shake hands is an enormous sort of emotional effect on people when they come to church. And that has been really very difficult. And the not being able to meet freely, except on Sunday morning, we've been grateful to be able to meet, though this next month we can't. It has a huge impact on the feel of our worship. But we've learned to adapt and to listen more. We've had more silence in our worship than before, and we've had more music just to listen to, not just hymns, but other types of music to listen to, and that's been quite meditative. So that's been good. When we had total lockdown, we had Zoom services, which we'll do again this coming month. And I was just getting the hang of that towards the end of lockdown. So I'll be I think it'll be much better this next 4 weeks than it was at the beginning last time.
Thank you. And Steve?
Hi, yeah. I think for us, it's going to be a very similar picture to most people. We're a very social group, so as Stephen said, it's killing some people not to be able to come up and give you a hug or shake your hand. The singing is definitely missed in services, although we do play the music and encourage people to think about the words while the music is being played rather than being able to sing it. I think the main thing for me probably is it's just changed the way that we do things. So being a Christian church, we try to follow the Saviour's example, caring for each individual, caring for the one. And obviously with lockdown, we haven't been able to go visit people. So we're using technology, and we're trying to reach out and support each other as best we can. So I think that's been it's been a real positive in some ways, because it means we're reaching out to more people more frequently. But obviously I think that in person, face to face, being able to see and greet and support each other, it has a real impact on particularly on some of the individuals.
Thank you. And Sunita?
So it's had an impact on most of the faiths and most of the religions since the COVID started. We are a very social group as well, and we used to meet every month regularly at the temple, which we've not been able to do for the last 7 months. And it's been very, very hard for the families who used to come regularly, as other people have set up the digital system. So we do Zoom meetings. And in the last 2 months, we set up the Zoom group, and we're doing the prayers in the temple, but only 6 people as the, restricted people to be in the temple. And we have been able to do the Zoom that way. We also do Zoom for our hymn singing on Tuesday evenings regularly. And in fact, it's had a very positive effect on the children. Some of the children have come forward and learned some of the hymn singings. And it's so nice to hear them singing with us all together. Obviously, we all miss the food, which is the refreshment that we used to enjoy at the temple, everybody bringing the food together, which we can't do. We've missed celebrating all our religious festivals, and we're going to miss celebrating our Diwali function, which is due in 2 weeks' time. So we've got to think how we're going to do that. Maybe 2 of us will go to the temple, do our prayer, and do a Zoom meeting so people can visit the temple that way. And we have made a video for the temple that we can send it to them so they can have the visit to the temple that way. So I have got the video done for the people who've not been able to visit the temple. So it's hard time, but we're all learning. And I think COVID has given us a rare strength to bring everybody together as well. As Steve said, that people are joining in more often than they used to do. But time will tell us now what's likely to happen. And now with restrictions, we have to watch the space.
Thank you, Sunita. And Kyla?
It's been quite interesting redefining our sense of community, actually. We've had all kinds of things going on. We're a very busy rural market town church. And so we've had reflections going out every day via email and post to all of our members. We've had increased activity on our Facebook page. Our website's been live streaming our services when we were able to. Our morning and evening prayer, for example, goes out live and is recorded as well. And we've had, the thing that's been most effective has been our buddy system. So we've divided our church community and slightly beyond that into small groups with one buddy leader for each group, who's then been disseminating the information and keeping in contact and feeding back to the ministry team if there's anything that they're worried about or if people need help for anything. So it's been a really great way. And like's been said before, I think we're in better contact with each other than we were before, because we're not just been relying on people pitching up on a Sunday morning. So that's been fantastic. WhatsApp groups have been working well as well. We have been able to meet for worship in small numbers only. So we've been limiting our services to about 40. We've been meeting outside. We've got a church green, so we're very lucky with that too. But now it's colder. We've been coming indoors, which means we've had to limit our numbers further. But we're lucky in our church that we don't have pews, we have chairs. So we can adapt our space quite easily. We've also had to adapt our music because we have quite a strong music contingent in our church. So we've just relaunched a new worship band, oddly enough. A funny time to do it. But it's because a group of musicians and cantors came together and said, look, we can't have our traditional hymns. So let's try and do something different. Let's explore what we can do with the music if we haven't got to worry about whether or not the congregation knows the hymns. So we've been able to do some amazing things with our music and relaunch our band. So that's been great. But it's been mostly our older members and our younger families who have been affected, I think, with what's gone on in lockdown. Although our younger families have been able to access services, our live stream services, more regularly than perhaps they'd been able to come to church before. So it means that they can either watch it live or they can watch the recording later. And that's given them a lot more freedom. And so we made the decision when we came out of lockdown last time that we were going to continue to live stream. And we have been doing that. Mm-hmm. Obviously now we're going to be going back to that's the only option for people for a while at least. And during the first lockdown, the first few weeks of lockdown, I decided to go and stand outside the front and just sing all the hymns that we plan our music a month in advance and just sing all of the hymns that would have been sung in church on a Sunday, and then found that our young families thought that was a great idea. So they were coinciding their daily exercise with walking past my house and hearing me singing all the hymns, which was fantastic. I did get my dogs barking a few times through it as well, which was quite good fun. But the fact that our young families wanted to engage with that was really, really encouraging. So it's been really positive, even though the hymns were really quite traditional.
Thank you, Kayla. And Anna?
So I work in two very small communities, one in Norwich and one in London. I'm also the student chaplain for progressive Jews throughout the country. So it's been very interesting for us during COVID. Like I think many other people have said, we moved our services onto Zoom. Some communities chose not to use Zoom, but to live stream or various other things, but making things accessible online. The reason I really liked Zoom is because you still get that community feel of people having a chat before and after the service between the boxes and things like that. It's been challenging, I think, like others have said, not to have the music. That awful cacophony of sound when everyone's unmuted on Zoom means that singing together is impossible. So finding ways to have other people involved and making sure it's not just kind of the me show, but a participatory service has been really important. And I think like others, we had a lot of festivals during this whole period between March and just recently we had Passover and our High Holy Day services of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I think for Passover, it was the first one and it was kind of novelty. How do we get this online? But by the time we got to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the two holiest days of the year, people were feeling quite defeated, I think, and were hoping that we would have been able to be together by then. We managed to make it work. I actually had 3 East Anglian communities, as well as my London community, joined together on Zoom, which was a fun, I guess, jigsaw of different communities' traditions, but we made it work. And I think that's been the main thing, making it work and finding ways to connect people and continue religious life while we can't be physically together. And the strangest thing is I started my job with Norwich in September, which means I've not physically met any of the people yet. I've not been able to go. So that's been very bizarre.
Gosh. Thank you, Anna. Thank you. And Shan?
Yeah, hello everyone. Very nice to be here. What came to me was, first of all, to say salam alaikum, may peace be with you all. Secondly, the name of our religion, al-Islam, comes from one of the divine names of Allah, God himself, which is as-salam, which means the peaceful one, or the one who bestows peace. On this note, it may sound a bit out of context, but at the very beginning of the outbreak, the Secretary General of the UN said the first thing the world needs, the first thing we need is a global ceasefire. As a Muslim, I totally condone that. And then he said, we now have a common enemy. Now, I suppose this is what we're trying to address in the best way we can. And on that note, what came to me at the very beginning of it, I went to the Quran, and in there, there's a very beautiful verse which really sets out the entire Muslim creed. And it starts with, it is not righteousness to turn to the east or to the west, but it is righteousness to believe in Allah, his angels, books, and messengers, and so on. And at the very end, there's a sign off, it says, and to remain steadfast in all times of panic. And I kind of stuck to that all the way through. And it says also, the phrase we have, and this is very important indeed, which goes along with that, is to say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Surely we are from Allah, and unto him we shall return. And this is important later on, because this is often said at times of bereavement, but also calamity, to remain patient and steadfast. And I hope this is what we've tried to do. You probably have been aware that for the first time ever, the Hajj pretty much had to be cancelled, the annual pilgrimage to Mecca, which involves about 2.5 million people. Obviously, that would have been impossible. As far as I know in history, it's never happened before. There was a very limited token of people who actually live in Mecca, who were able to perform the rites on behalf of everyone else. In terms of our Jamal gathering, which is on a Friday, those also had to be cancelled initially. They are now happening, but there are very strict precautions when it comes to attending a place of worship, a mosque, about washing, spacing, all these things. We have, however, got the guidance, which is that in times of trial, we are permitted to make our own houses places of worship. So this, I think, is a strategy a lot of us have adopted, and to look after family and all our duties, and to remain in communication like this, for example, or however we have what's available for us. It isn't obviously the same thing as actually meeting people, in the mosque physically, but we've had to make do, and we have to comply with the law for everyone else, because this is something for all of humanity. It's not just for this or that faith, but all of humanity. It's a test, and I think we must learn the lessons. It's absolutely vital.
Thank you. Thank you. And Jenny?
Yes, I suppose in a way, Quakers have been really lucky in as far as we are very used to worshipping in silence, in stillness. We worship we have no churches, we have no temples or synagogues. And And so very quickly, we were able to set up a Zoom and to worship together, so that almost the complete community at Beccles was able to worship virtually together. And I think we were amazed at how powerful it was. Although, I mean, in my mind, I sort of think of it as being a two-dimensional kind of worship rather than a three-dimensional, that there is something missing that you gain when you're sitting together in collective worship. But it was reassuringly powerful. And as a result, I think as a community, we've been very lucky in not feeling that we've been fragmented. We were well aware that there were some people who couldn't join Zoom, and it was we took care that those people were included with telephone conversations and setting up sort of private times of prayer with each other as well. My daughter thought it was hilarious that you'd have 24 people sitting in silence on a Zoom meeting, but actually the power of the Spirit was with us, and I think that's something we've all learned and valued. We were very lucky, I think, also in fairly quickly being able to set up, being able to open the meeting house again, so that a limited number of people could go and worship there. And the meeting house linked with the Zoom meeting, so we had a bonded meeting. So again, we felt that we were very much together. I think as far as worship is concerned, that we haven't lost a great deal of what we believe. We believe that there is that of God in everyone, and so that when we are thinking together, then we can center down and listen to the Spirit, listen to what the promptings of love and truth in our hearts is in our first advice. And I think in a way, it really has brought us as a community almost more together. I think this is what Rose started off by saying, almost more together than has driven us apart. But we don't miss the music because we don't use music in meeting. We're very good at singing out of meeting, but we don't use it actually very often in meeting. And we don't have celebration because every day is a celebration. So I think we have been very lucky, or blessed is perhaps the right word.
Thank you, Jenny. And thank you all for answering the first question so succinctly. And I'd like to move on to question 2, which is, how have funerals been affected due to COVID-19 within your faith communities? And Rose, if we could start with you, that would be.
Right. Well, in fact, 2 of our members have died during this period. And the funeral I went to was actually a green funeral and was held out in the woods. So we were able to physically be there and be suitably dispersed. It was very lovely. The other one, the deceased person's family were not Baha'is and organised the funeral, so we had very little say in that. I think the only real significant problem hasn't occurred in our community, but I'm sure it has in some, is that a devout Baha'i would have their own winding sheet ready. Certainly the Iranian Baha'is that in the Baha'i diaspora, having had to leave Iran, and would want to be buried wearing a burial ring. And I think people who died of COVID, the funeral directors, I think I'm right, we're not allowed to open the body bag.
That would be right. It could be placed within the coffin, but they wouldn't be able to be wrapped in it.
Yeah, so that would be the only practical decision. But we are told to to obey the rules of whatever country we're in, and whatever the circumstances are, we have to adapt like everybody else. So I think otherwise we've just been affected by the limited numbers and so on, just as every other community.
Thank you, Rose.
I was just going to add that Baha'is always opt for burial rather than cremation. So, and burials were particularly limited at one point, where there were only, was it 10 people actually at the graveside? So, so it's been hard, but just as it has for everyone.
Thank you, and Stephen.
The main effect is the worry about the numbers that are allowed, particularly when you've got a large family, or if you've got a community figure that you are doing the service for. And that has been difficult. Some villages have coped by having people walk their dogs just at that time, and they've been able to sort of line the road coming up to the church, all spaced out at their distances, but so that the family know that there was a support in the community, without actually causing safeguarding issues with health. The other thing is that for some families, that when you can't sing, it's like you want to give your loved one a proper funeral, and saving it till later isn't quite the same. But nevertheless, for most of those funerals that I've been involved in, they were of people who had been ill for quite some time, and that were not COVID related. And although it was difficult for those who couldn't be there, for those who were there, the person had been living a quiet life before, and to have a quiet ceremony, it's just seemed very nice and fitting for what their life had been of late. But those are the main difficulties, and of the number issue, and not being able to, the feeling of not being able to do it properly because you can't sing.
Thank you.
We've had more recorded music and more meditation while music plays, which is good. And as I say, those gathering along the roadside that they knew the hearse was travelling has been a support to others.
That's lovely. Thank you, Stephen. And Steve.
Yeah, thankfully we haven't had to have very many funerals during this period. I think, like everybody, the biggest impact has been not being able to physically comfort one another as you're mourning the loss of a loved one. We, as part of our faith, we do have a dedicatory prayer over the graveside once the coffin is lowered into the grave. Normally you would huddle together around the grave because there would be no microphone or anything. And obviously that's not been possible to do. The numbers have been very limited. So I think people have adapted as you know, we tend to do, and have paid their respects in other ways. They visited the graveside after the funeral service has happened, or you know, I think, as Stephen has said, they found adaptive ways to be in the background while the service is taking place. But I think, again, you know, the main thing for me has been the ability to just comfort people and to look after their needs, but having to do that from a distance, and finding other inventive ways of keeping in touch with them to make sure that they're okay during, you know, that period of mourning and settling into a new way of life.
Thank you. And Sunita.
So I must say that we haven't had any, that I have been aware of anyone passing away recently in the last few months, any of our family members in this area. But I'm very much aware some of our very close friends have lost their loved ones in India, and it's been very difficult for them to have the service for them, because we have a tradition that we meet after the cremation within the family members, and we have not been able to go and support them physically, to talk to them and support them in that comfort of grief. But we have done the Zoom meetings with them when they are able to connect, because it's usually mourning up to 30 days after someone passes away, which has been quite hard for some of the members, but they have adapted to it because they accept this is the way it's going to be. Over here, from what I'm aware, the numbers will be very restricted when it comes to cremation, and we will have to abide by that, and we will know better what's the government regulation is going to be. But by God's grace, we haven't lost anyone that I'm aware of, that somebody's rung me up and said that we've lost our mom or dad in this country. But obviously they have lost their loved ones back home. If they were visiting, then they can't come back here, which has been very hard for them, because somebody went in March and they couldn't come back to this country because of being ill there, which has been hard for the family member. And they accept it, but it takes time for them to accept when people are away from home, because that was their home over here. But they respect that. But I think we will support as best as we can in the way they would like the support. And once the temple opens up, then they can come in numbers of 1 or 2 to come and put their prayers across. So we've been lucky that way, but obviously not being able to support them has been hard for all of us, because it's a tradition that we meet up after someone passes away in the house. But we have to accept that can't happen now. And now with restrictions much more now, that is going to be one person within the family member or anyone to meet in the garden is going to be quite hard for people. But we'll see what happens.
Thank you so much. And Kayla.
So I think for us, we're coming across families that are already really quite distressed before we get to see them. That's, they're getting distress around hospital visits and end of life procedures, i.e. they're not able to visit their loved one, the difficulty getting through on the phone, at least to speak to them. And if they are a family of faith, they're finding it very difficult that their loved one may well not have had any access to the spiritual during those last few moments and weeks and months of their life. And then that's added with further distress that when we get to the funerals, they have to then choose between family members because the numbers are so limited. I've not had too many complaining about or being worried about that they can't sing in the service. I think people have felt quite relieved at that, actually, to be honest. And again, that's given more opportunity for people to play music that they might not have felt that they were able to choose, perhaps if they were having a more traditional service in a church, because we've had certainly more crematorium services than we have church services. I mean, I've done 9 in the last 2 weeks, and only one of those was a graveside service. They're finding it really difficult that they can't comfort each other in the way that they would normally do so. But I found that speaking directly into this at the beginning of the service, almost like a notice at the beginning, this is going to feel awkward, this is going to feel stilted, but that doesn't mean that we're not standing together in love for this person. That seems to have helped to a certain degree. And certainly adding more meditative space during the service with a piece of reflective music seems to have been really well received and engaged with by the families.
Thank you. And Anna?
So the wider Jewish community has been hit quite hard by COVID. I think it might have been because there was a Jewish festival just before lockdown where we didn't know that we shouldn't meet at that time. So there were a lot of deaths seen throughout the Jewish community, which meant that the Jewish burial places in London, but this filtered through to rules for all the rabbis and cantors, decided that to be even more limited with the number of mourners that could be there. And at one point, a decision was made that it could only be the person taking the service and the key mourner, which caused, of course, as you can imagine, a lot of upset and people having to decide how to say goodbye to their loved ones, and clergy having to decide how to comfort those in mourning. It meant that at the beginning a lot of funerals were done on Zoom, and sometimes the key mourner would decide not to be there because there would be more clarity of sound and more community together over Zoom. And it also affected the shiva, the 7 days, where you go to the mourner's house and bring them food and comfort them and say prayers together for 7 days after the death of a loved one. Now the numbers are higher than that in terms of who can be at a funeral, but they're still very limited. I led a cremation this morning where only 11 people were there, everyone masked up. No one could join in readings or singing. I'm sure it's the same across the board. And the family were talking about how much they were hoping they could find a way to properly celebrate their mother the way they felt she would really want to be said goodbye to. And that's a sort of narrative we've heard from lots of families, wishing that they had the support of the whole community and their broader families with them when they say goodbye to their loved ones.
Thank you, Anna. And Shan.
Yes, hello everyone again. Salam alaikum. Yes, thinking about it, I suppose the first thing to say is that death is a very important part of life for Muslims. You know, we should think or be aware of death while we're alive and try to make provision all the time for what's beyond. Be prepared and ready for that. This is about the fact that we are mortal and we have to come to terms with that in the right way. Obviously, we look on the fact that it is in the hands of God. Life, death, and all these matters are in God's hands. But that things should be done rightly. So I was a member of the local team. One time we set it up specially for what we call janaza, which means the rites of death and so on. And we went to great lengths to get it all in order. We don't actually have a washing parlour, for example, because that's vital as a part of respect to the dead person, is the proper washing of the body. It's very beautifully done with special perfumes, and it has to be done rightly. This was obviously, you know, at this point, we don't have a parlour of our own. We have the services of a local funeral director. But we had to see that, you know, touching the body and so on, if it had died of COVID, would be prohibited except with gloves or something to prevent all the practical things you can think of. A lot of these provisions are practical anyway. For example, if one attends, you know, the washing, it's obligatory afterwards to wash the whole body anyway. You know, that's part of it, so that would be built in anyway. In other ways, about respect for the dead, the family always comes first as a rule, the close family. So, you know, they at least should not be denied. I have been a lot involved in the past, but recently not involved. I haven't attended a funeral or anything, you know, for some while, but we do now have a designated Muslim funeral place, cemetery. And the great irony is this, is that very recently, after an application going out many years, the local council allocated us a section in the local cemetery, which had been set aside for a pandemic. And, you know, this happened literally not long before, you know, within months before COVID hit us. So that was a massive gesture from the, you know, the local council, which we greatly appreciated. We have found a place here. I hope we've earned a place here in the local community as a whole. And we feel that, you know, there has to be a balance here about provision which is specific for Islam and for everyone. You know, this is vital. In my own interpretation, at the time of death by the graveside, there's very little that divides anyone at all. I've attended interfaith funerals and so on. But obviously, it's part of the stresses, and it was addressed very early on indeed by Muslim Council of Britain, which is a kind of umbrella, very moderate organisation for Muslims in general of the whole country here. And that was one of the first things that was looked at. What do we do about burial? What if there's an awful lot, you know? And again, I've been under lockdown in self-isolation since mid-March. The last funeral I went to was just before it was actually an interfaith burial. so I haven't been party to any burials that have taken place recently. I would hope that something like this should make us even more aware of human frailty, of our limitations, our weaknesses, and therefore all more that we have need of sympathy, love, understanding of all sorts, to help us through times like this. As I say, times of calamity, which especially mentioned in the Quran. Being a believer or Muslim does not prevent the fact that we will be tested or that we will have to sustain calamities. And I put this in this category. A scholar at the very beginning was questioned about this, and he was asked, does this constitute a punishment, in terms of religious interpretation? And he said, no, it doesn't fulfill those criteria, but nevertheless, it is a test, a trial, and a calamity.
Thank you. Thank you. And Jenny?
Yes, you probably won't be surprised to hear that Quaker Funerals follow the testimony to simplicity. They take the form of a meeting for worship in the manner of friends. But one of our first concerns is to listen to the family and to discern what is going to be most helpful to them, to help them in any preparations which they are finding difficult. So to be a practical help. And the funeral itself is held by two elders. And then in that held silence which follows, members of the family and their friends can bear testimonies to the life of the person who has died, to celebrate that life. And also the holding by the elders is to really help relatives mourn that death and to feel the presence, to feel God's presence, to feel that that person is safe and goes with our blessing. We have only had one death since the beginning of the pandemic, and that was a most amazing. I mean, the most painful part was the limitation on the family. The limitation, I think we were 10 at the beginning, but there were just 10 people there, and it was a green burial again at Farnham. It was a beautiful day, absolutely beautiful, and the sun just slanted down through the trees. It was like being in a tree cathedral. Just being there was a blessing, and I think that the time that the family had to really take their leave of the person that they loved was very moving. There was poetry, there was singing. So it wasn't quite in the manner of friends, but it was absolutely wonderful. So really, for Quakers, the primary concern really is to support the family in their grief and to celebrate the life of the person who's died. Thank you.
And so finally, we come to the last question of our discussion, which is, what strategies have you developed to support your community during this pandemic? And we've heard a little bit about some of the innovative ideas that communities have come up with. But if we could elaborate a little bit further, that might be really helpful. Rose, we'll start with you.
Well, I suppose the first thing I think about is the phrase "your community," because as Baha'is, everyone is our community. So, and as we're quite few in number and quite separated, our community that we're supporting is the folk that live round about us, really. So, I think you'll find most Baha'is have been busy looking for opportunities to support their friends and neighbours. And of course, any Baha'is that are within their reach and they can visit within the rules. We have some elderly and frail Baha'is in the area, who obviously we have to prioritise care and visits for. But the community is everybody. and the Baha'is don't really see a limit on the community as the people who are actually registered as Baha'is. And I think because the whole focus of the Baha'i faith is oneness and unity, wherever we can create some community with a common purpose, then we are being Baha'is, we are pursuing the Baha'i faith in its core. So any neighbourhood efforts to support the community practically through food banks or whatever, you probably find Baha'is there. I can just read a very short message that came from our Universal House of Justice, which is the world body of the Baha'i faith. So, however difficult matters are at present, and however close to the limits of their endurance some sections of societies are brought, humanity will ultimately pass through this ordeal, and it will emerge on the other side with greater insight and with a deeper appreciation of its inherent oneness and interdependence. So I guess that's what we've been trying to underline, the interdependence and the possibility of reorienting society along spiritual values once we are in a position to rebuild. Because I think many people have seen the frailties in our society only too clearly during the last few months.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you. And Stephen?
We, in terms of the people who come to church, we tried initially to cater for them with a weekly letter, knowing that quite a lot of them didn't have computers or anything. And then very quickly found within a week or so that there were lots of people connected with church who were also interested in having the weekly letter with suggestions for worship and hymns and so on. And amongst the 6 villages that I'm a priest in charge of, we had contributions from each of the villages each week in the round robin letter. And in terms of caring for their neighbours, the church members were trying to, those with computers were printing it off for those neighbours near them who didn't have it. And then at Easter, we started Zoom services and ran the weekly letter and a Zoom service. But that basic principle of people with computers printing it off for their neighbours who didn't have it is something that we also used in other areas of looking after people. One was simply to look out for people and to make sure they were all right and provided for. But in all the villages, there were efforts from all sorts of people to, right at the beginning, to coordinate the response. And church members were joining in the responses that were all around us to make sure principally that people got food and that they got their medical prescriptions and whatever else. But those were the 2 main focuses. And so that's how the help for the community arose, not just amongst church members, but for the villages at large, whether they were Christian or not.
Thank you. Thank you. And Steve?
Yeah, I probably didn't elaborate at the beginning quite so much. We're a worldwide church, so the local communities here as a part of that church. We actually had very inspired leadership from the president of the church a couple of years ago, where the focus changed more to home-centered worship, with church being an additional support to that. And it was just recognizing the fact that we can all study the gospel, we can read our scriptures and pray and sing hymns and all that stuff from home. And that's where the center of strength should be. So I think we've had almost a preparation for this over the last year or 2. With COVID, because the chapel was obviously closed at points, we did what everybody else has done, and we've used Zoom or online meeting services that anybody could log into, and they've worked really well. We've had a main service where everybody comes together, and then there've been other smaller group meetings for the youth, for the children aged 8 to 12. For the men, for the ladies, for their own groups to talk about the things that they want to. We've made a lot of use of technology with youth activities and children activities. So they've had weekly quizzes. They've used online games like Heads Up and Jackbox. We've had missionaries in church history sites over in America have conducted virtual tours and made those available for people to be able to log in and see. We've had motivational talks from church leaders, motivational speakers. There was one that I particularly was touched by, Tim Ballard. I don't know if anyone will have heard of him. He runs the Operation Underground in the States, looking at child trafficking. And he did a what we call a fireside online, just to talk about the work that he was doing and the impacts of that. So there's been a lot of those sorts of activities going on, trying to give, particularly I think our members that are living alone and don't have family around them necessarily, giving them opportunities just to feel involved in things, to spend some time with others. I think the other main thing that I touched upon before is the fact that we do try and look after each other. So the church has a ministering program. Every family is assigned a couple of the men, a couple of the ladies to look after them, to keep in touch with them, to see if there are any needs there that they can be supported in. So there has been a lot more focus on making sure that we are reaching out to each individual and each family, just to see where we can support where possible. I think my final thing I would say is the ability to help others, I think, makes a real difference to individuals. So service is something that we always encourage the members to get involved with. We do have a website, justserve.org, that I would encourage anyone to log on to and have a look. Organizations have the ability to post service projects, things that they want to try and accomplish on there, and it gives me and others as individuals just a chance to see the sorts of things that are out there that we might be able to get involved with. And there's been all sorts of things, from knitting hats for babies in third world countries to, I don't know, all sorts of different charity type opportunities. So I think for my colleagues in other faiths, there's an opportunity there if you have projects and you need some people to get involved. And for those of you that are watching this broadcast, please log on. It's a great opportunity to join with others, even within COVID and from a distance, just to make a difference in somebody's life and to do something good. And I think everybody always feels so much better when they've had those opportunities.
Thank you, Steve. And Sunita.
It's been really good to hear everybody's views on what people have developed strategically for during this COVID pandemic that we're all in. I must say, Zoom has been a big savior for all of us. WhatsApp group has worked very, very well within our group. That's what we used to inform everybody before for when we were doing the functions or meeting at the temple. We've also got some meditation and yoga classes running through the Zoom. The children have been taking part in reciting their mantras within a group leader who's helping them to learn about it while they've got the time to do it, because children won't often come to the temple. So this has been quite a good way of encouraging them to join. They're also looking at doing some arts and crafts classes with them, but we will see how they will take that on. It's quite difficult when you can't see people face to face, because that's what we're all used to doing it, and that makes it hard. But people are learning about it and adapting to it. Singing goes really well because then you're not in the group and you're not going to infect anybody. So on the Zoom, it does really well. But it's quite hard for everybody. And we are developing again to run the Zoom sessions for our regular prayers once a month from the temple itself. So anybody can join, whether it's interfaith group, any community. And we do put our programs on our website as well when it's being held. So it's useful for anyone to join and see what's happening within our faith. We have got over 23 Hindu faiths coming together in Hindu faith. So it's quite difficult. So we had Bengali Association, they used to do Durga Puja. So they had to cancel it this time at the last minute. We can't celebrate Diwali, which is like Christmas for all of us. So that will be hard for people, but we have to develop how we manage that. And Christmas will be another thing that we have to look at how we're going to celebrate it. I think it's tough time for everybody, and we're all working together in this to help each other. And people feel very supported by seeing face to face on the Zoom. You know, WhatsApp is great, but if you can't see each other, it makes it harder for them. They can relate much better to everybody's listening and comfort from each other. So it's just hard work at the moment for all of us. But we are working together.
Thank you, Sunita. And Kayla?
Well, we've had, as I said before, our reflections and our prayers going out every day initially, but now twice weekly, going out on email and printing them off and posting them to those that don't have access to email. But the Church of England's got a lot of excellent information and resources available online. And so we've been using a lot of those to disseminate that information out to our communities, because there's no point in reinventing the wheel. The information that's been coming out has been great. But we are a busy, outward-looking church in a very deprived community in Norfolk. And so our good relationships that we've been building up over the last few years in particular have now been bearing fruit with our local agencies. So there's been quite a lot of joining up that hadn't really happened before. For example, we've been working with our police and our council to support a growing number of homeless around this area. And we've been running our food distribution service out of the church, out of the church rooms, and our community support in collecting prescriptions, and with our Families Matter key worker, who is our community liaison, works from the church but within the community. We've been able to coordinate support for our young families, which has been amazing. Whether that be mental health support or assisting them to find local community support or access to facilities. The thing that's been quite difficult to maintain has been support for the elderly, particularly those who are caring for partners who are already sick. So that's been quite difficult because we've not been able to physically go in and spend time with them as we would have done before. And there's only so far you can go with a phone call. But all the work that we have been able to do is, of course, underpinned with prayer, offered by everyone, but in particular by those who are at home and are isolating. So although they can't physically be out picking up prescriptions or people shopping or doing that, they are then able to be at home and praying for all of us team that are out there doing that. And it's so important because that means that's bringing our community together. We're involved together in whatever way we can. And that encourages us and allows us to reach out that little bit further and a little bit wider, and doing it together as a community.
Thank you, Kayla. And Anna, you're next.
Yes. So there's been a collaborative effort really between the kind of the umbrella movement. So liberal Judaism and reform Judaism often work together and sometimes separately, and even the World Union of Progressive Judaism, as well as the individual communities. So some of the things that we've been doing as individual communities are kind of upping the number of services and events that we offer all online, with coffee and chats being offered during the week over Zoom, sometimes with outside speakers and sometimes just a chance to get together and have a chat together. We had a retired doctor come and talk to us about the history of pandemics and epidemics, which went down well. And we have been doing activities like there was a song session it was quite amazing. It was all the people that used to go on the summer camp, and I think we had people in the Zoom room spanning who used to go there from 1970s to who are going there from today, and we did that every so often. Morning services were happening every single day, and I think it is still possible to access them every single day, but I don't know if others saw that as well. At the beginning, there was a lot of uptake and loads of people coming to things, and then it kind of trickled off. It'll be interesting to see if there's that push again once people, now that we're in lockdown again. We also had a care group meeting. We're only 63 members in the community, so we're trying to get around phoning everybody in Norwich in that community. And we went through and kind of had a look at who might need a phone call first, and reaching out to people that way. And I think those are kind of the key things that we've been doing. What we're really concerned about at the moment with the students, in my role as chaplain, we sent out care packages to all the students. And I'm quite concerned about everybody, but particularly the students and the first year students, because I think them first moving to university was novelty. It was still bright, they were meeting people, and now they're still locked in, uncertain of when they can go home. And of course, the seasons are changing, and that can affect a lot of people in many ways, even without a global pandemic. So I'm really concerned about making sure the students have proper support, and of course, everyone else has proper support, because I think this time's going to be harder.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. And Sean.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum again. From a very personal point of view, we've been self-isolating, my wife and I, since mid-March. We occasionally, as it were, surface, which is quite unreal, to encounter the world again, if you like. One thing I think as a family, we've actually ironically maybe come together quite a lot more, possibly as a result. It's all via WhatsApp, things like that. I've been keeping touch with actually what's happening in the world quite a lot. I feel very much for those affected by COVID, on top of all kinds of calamities that they're having to do with anyway, from war and so on. I have to say, I do think of Gaza City at the moment, and I kind of think that we're incredibly fortunate here not to be in that situation. We're also very fortunate to have a garden at the back, and you know, I think an awful lot for a lot of people who don't have that, to have access to oxygen in big cities and so on. One thing is put very firmly in my mind, and I think a lot of people, is that if and when we come out of this, things are going to be different. We have a duty, not only for ourselves to survive, if you like, just at that raw level, but to come out better from it in some way, better human beings, more compassionate, more loving, more giving, you know, all the qualities that we should have in our religions, and, you know, trying to exemplarize them. I think every religion has something to offer. And maybe that's something we could all come together on specifically at this time in some way, to see not only what we have in common, but building on that maybe in such a way, so that we can actually accommodate all, while remaining or keeping our own identities as well, not losing that. I believe there is hope beyond this. I actually think, not that this was a judgment, but that is a trial. It's happened before. There have been big plagues. There were 3 plagues back in the Middle Ages or whatever. A lot of people thought at the time the world was going to come to an end. Right now, I think probably people aren't thinking like that in the same way, but it is something that can make people turn to God. Because whenever we really feel need, sincerely, for a lot of people who may even have called themselves unbelievers up till that time, would nevertheless feel the need to turn to one who has greater knowledge and and so on. So I think I'm not very representative here. I'm sorry. I haven't attended the mosque for a long time. That's one thing I never ever would have missed of Friday prayers, and that's something to be aware of for a lot of us. I think in times of need, this can be a very good tonic, and it can make us aspire and strive, which we actually need as human beings. We need to struggle. It's actually quite good for us. And we shouldn't just throw up our hands and say, what's this, etc. I think that's not really the right way to turn to God at this time. He's actually given us the means. And in the time, finally, you can mention this, that if one's a Muslim and claims to be a believer, that's all very well, but we also have to be tested with respect to that, because it's a big thing to say I believe in God, and that's all very well because that's easy on the tongue, but there's quite a lot more to it than that. So that's something we all have to take on board anyway.
Thank you. And Jenny?
Yes, I just want to thank Sean, for reminding us that this will come to an end, that we will come through this, and sometimes it's quite hard not just to concentrate on what you're doing day by day, but be able to look forward. And I'm very lucky. I live near Southwold and surrounded by beautiful nature, and nature itself just reminds me. I mean, the seasons, it dies and it is reborn, and it gives me hope, and it's really, really important to hold on to that hope. As far as the question is concerned, Lucy, to come back to that, I never thought I'd say just what a huge blessing Zoom has been. I was an absolutely IT denier beforehand, and I've been dragged screaming really into the 21st century, but we couldn't have done without it. And for our Quaker worship, it's been a total blessing. We've been able to keep our 2 regular meetings for worship going throughout the whole time. One on Friday, which is followed by discussion, and then one on a Sunday as well. We've also set up circles of friendship where everybody has one name that they undertake to phone up once a week, and they are phoned in turn by somebody else once a week. And that has gone on all the way through, and in the coming weeks is going to be really, really important again. I think one thing which strikes me that we have been able to do, we've actually taken the extra time that we're being given to do a lot of reading, to share our information about books which are important, to really put deep thought into the Black Lives Matter and the Build Back Better Britain campaigns. Not the Conservative logo, by the way. It was Build Back Britain, started 2 months before that. But it is really a real commitment to look at what has been going wrong in our societies, and to commit again to work towards a world of peace, a world of compassion, all the things that every one of the speakers has mentioned. And we're given the time, let's use it, really use it. And although we can't actually put into operation projects at the moment, let's commit to making a real commitment and a real difference when life returns, perhaps, to a bit more normality. Thank you, Lucy.
Well, I'd just like to thank everyone for their contribution today. And I hope that this video will be able to be used in schools and educational facilities to teach and educate others about the interfaith communities that we have. So thank you all so much. And maybe we'll return on another topic at some other time. But thank you so much. Thank you all.
Okay, cheers.